I think I always knew that I wanted to go to college and that I would eventually do that. But it really became apparent to me when I was in eighth grade. And I was talking with some of my teachers about what high school I would go to, trying to decide because at that point they were telling us, if you're going to go to a vocational school, we need to know that. And one of my teachers, my gifted and talented teacher, overheard me saying that I would go to a VOTEC school. And she asked me, well, you want to go to college, don't you? And I said, of course. And she said, well, not that you can't do that at the vocational school, but I believe that your chances would be better if you go to William Penn High School and take advantage of all the college coursework that they offer there. And that's when I really started to think more seriously about the path to getting to college. For me specifically, vocational school became an option because my friends were going. All of my friends were talking about wanting to go to vocational school to pursue careers. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to help my family, get a job, and kind of prepare myself for the world after school. And so I thought that made sense because they seemed to have very clear pathways. And so that was something that I began to think about, partly because of my friends, partly because it seemed to make sense. When I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I think that my career path has shifted multiple times and continues to shift, really. When I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Then I took biology and said, maybe not. And then I thought I would be a lawyer. And that actually remained my goal for quite some time. But I knew that I wanted to help the community and just be a part of sort of the bigger picture. I didn't know what that would look like. My career understandings at that time were very limited. I didn't have any role models that had more professional jobs. And so I only really knew doctor, lawyer, business person. So for me, I think I wouldn't say I had one particular challenge that I had to overcome. I was very lucky because I had a very supportive family. While we weren't affluent, we were okay. We were getting by fine. And so I guess for me, the biggest challenge was just understanding what to do. Somewhere along the lines, I got the idea that maybe from my eighth grade teacher, rigor matters, classes matter, being involved in your community matters, but in terms of how I actually knew what things to do, I didn't really know. And so it was sort of just from the media or from watching movies or reading books, kind of figuring out what a good, quote unquote, college profile looks like. And so just kind of maneuvering that on my own. My parents were supportive, but they didn't know what the process was like. And so just being able to kind of make my way on my own was probably, I would say, the biggest challenge, but it didn't feel like a challenge at the time because I didn't know that that was not normal. I think that there's a lot of information out there. I think sometimes it can be information overload. I also think that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what you need to do to get into a college. And if you have one example, maybe, if you're lucky, you have one example. So you might follow that particular example, not really knowing that for my particular case at my school, this might not work. Or maybe I have other pathways that I could be thinking about. So I do think that there's information. I don't think it's easily accessible, and I don't think it's easily understood. I also think that there's sort of a cultural shift that needs to happen, especially in certain communities, particularly first generation. Can we read? Okay, so in terms of having access to information, I do think that there's a ton of information out there. I think it can be information overload at times, but I also believe that it's very difficult to access this information, right? I may not know that I don't know what classes to take, that I don't know that you should be involved in particular activities. I may have one or two role models, if I'm lucky, that I can follow, but those particular role models may not be exactly the path that I need to follow. I may have a completely different path that I should be considering. And so I think that it's a very difficult process to get this information to families in their particular situations because every student is going to look different and every student could pursue college in multiple ways. I do think in first generation families and households, it's particularly difficult because they may not have even that one example of someone in their community that has done it. And if they do, it might not be someone that has done it recently, right? The college landscape has changed dramatically, even in the last few years, let alone a whole generation. Sure, one of the biggest misconceptions that I had, and I still see this every day, is that I wouldn't be able to afford going to college. And so this is something that I think a lot of students are facing where they don't understand that just because you're not affluent does not mean you cannot go to college, does not mean you have to pay a lot to go to college. Even in my senior year when I told my dad that I was applying to the Ivy League and he said, how much does that cost? And I told him, oh, well, $65,000 at minimum. And, to be honest, it was wonderful because he said, we'll figure it out. We will figure that out. And so we started thinking about scholarships and things like that. Then lo and behold, we found out that all of these schools are need-based. And we paid very little We paid less than I would have paid going to the University of Delaware than I did going to the Cornell University. And we had no idea. I didn't understand this process until maybe my second year of college. I thought I was getting this giant scholarship because I was such an awesome student, when in fact every student at Cornell is an awesome student. And so it really was a matter of understanding the financial aid process, and understanding that just because you might be in a particular situation doesn't mean you can't access these places. And my worry is that if I hadn't just kept pushing, thinking I will get a scholarship, that was in the back of my mind. Somehow I'll find a $65,000 scholarship. I may have given up earlier. I may have said, I'll still do fine, but I'm not going to push myself that extra step. And that's my worry if we don't get this misconception squashed early, that students might not give their all, their whole time. So I definitely think that we just need more examples, more people saying, this is what I paid for school, this is how I did it. I think that in this country, it's very taboo to talk about money, to talk about finances. But if we don't talk about these things, we'll never know, right? I was always very open, kind of saying that I got this scholarship. However, I understand that a lot of my family and friends, they think it's a scholarship, right? And it's hard to articulate what it is, when in fact, I just started telling people, I got a big scholarship because I'm poor, not because I was so great at school, because I think that's easier to understand. And so I'm not saying that just you have to be on the poorest end of the scale to get funding, but schools will look at you in your particular situation and meet you where you are. So I actually wasn't extremely poor, right? I was paying $5,000 a year, which that meant that Cornell deemed me to be in a financial situation that I did need help, but I didn't need full ride, right? There are plenty of students there that were also on full ride. And so I just want students to know that in many cases, it can be based on your economic situation and not necessarily on your grades or things like this. Of course, you need to get into the school first, but once you've done that, you've done the hard work. You can find places that will meet you where you are. But I think the best way to do that is by talking to people. I think the schools, the colleges can do a better job of articulating this. I think that it's one of the most complicated parts of college, and I don't know that anyone has figured out how to do it well, but I think it's one area that we can continue to talk about, continue to bring up, and continue to ask questions so that we can really feel like we understand the process. So students, when they hear that I went to school on this huge grant, usually I get a lot of, wow, but I still don't think it's quite understood. I think that it comes out as a scholarship. It comes out as something that I earned. And that's why I try very hard to sort of stress the fact that it was based on my family situation. They usually get really excited, and then sometimes students will say, well, maybe I can go to Cornell. So there's sort of two ends of the spectrum that I've seen, people that only hear the scholarship part and get very excited about that, and some students who can really internalize what that meant will say, wow, maybe I can start to dream to go to a school like that. There's definitely a lot of things that I would do differently. I feel really happy and grateful that I ended up at such an amazing institution. My dream, though, was to go to Columbia University or Harvard University. And I, like I said, very happy with how I ended up at Cornell. I had a wonderful time, great experience. But if I could go back and talk to myself in ninth grade, definitely some things that I would have told myself to keep pushing, keep asking for more rigorous coursework, and don't work as much. So one of the things that I did my last 2 years of high school was work over 20 hours a week at times, because I thought that's how I would fund my college education, not even really realizing, $2,000 at the end of the year is not going to fund any type of education, right? And so to do that, I let go of some of my advanced placement classes. Again, I still made it to Cornell, so it still worked out. Granted, this was 10 years ago, so this probably wouldn't have worked out today. But if I could go back, I would tell myself, you don't need to work that much. It's good to work. I thought it was a good experience for me. Definitely taught me a lot, but maybe I could have worked 10 hours a week. Still, I would have had that work experience. I would have taken those additional AP classes. Maybe I would have gotten into Harvard. I'm grateful that where I went to school, and I wouldn't change it for the world, but it's definitely something that I know one area that I could have definitely addressed earlier had I known. I also would have asked more questions. When my teachers or guidance counselors would tell me something, I would just do what they said. I never really pushed back and said, well, why do I have to do that? Or can I get additional help with this? My counselors were amazing, right? They really believed in me and things like this, but they didn't necessarily push me to apply to Harvard. They sort of said, you're going to get a full ride at the University of Delaware. You should go there. And I would have loved to go to the University of Delaware. However, I wanted to push myself for that one step further. And so I would have liked to know that how do I push them to push me, right? How do I get that additional support where I felt like I was kind of going at it a little bit on my own? So my parents, so my dad is an immigrant from Mexico. and he got to the U.S. when he was about 14. So he didn't have a lot of educational opportunities, and now he actually has a good job working in boiling company. So he fixes boilers. I don't know what position that would be called, but that's what he does. My mom is American born from Eastern Europe. So she has been a stay-at-home mom my entire life, and she was lucky enough to graduate from high school. So in terms of advice for students, I would definitely say to push yourself, ask questions, try to find out all the pieces that you need to know in order to get yourself ready for school, and push back on those answers, right? If someone says you'll get a full ride at your state institution, that's wonderful. But why don't you push yourself a little further? Ask those questions. How can I do a little bit more? And I think the other piece would be just to continue to dream big. I think so I used to work in college admissions, and one of the schools that I visited, their school counselors told their students, we know that a lot of our students are not getting into the Ivy League because of the environment that we're in, the funding that we have. But what we can do is allow them to aspire very high, meaning that they're shooting for the stars, but they're going to land somewhere higher than they would have otherwise. And so that piece of advice has always kind of resonated with me and really made me want to share that with others, because I know that if they just continue to push, they will be able to get something that they may have never dreamed of.
That's great.
I graduated from William Penn High School in 2008.